There's a strange myth people tell themselves about leaving a difficult relationship, and it goes something like this. The hard part is getting out, and once you're out, the storm is over. Most of the time, that isn't true. If the person you left tends toward narcissistic patterns, the moment they realize you actually mean it, that you're not coming back this time, is often when things get stranger and more intense, not calmer. If you've lived through this, you already know the feeling. You brace yourself for an argument, expecting raised voices, obvious anger, or at least a disagreement that makes sense. Instead, you get something entirely different. What unfolds feels strangely calculated, almost surgical in its precision, as though every word has been carefully selected to produce one specific outcome, making you question whether you're actually the unreasonable one in the story. At first, nothing seems obviously wrong. They may speak calmly, even kindly. Their tone might be controlled, their expressions measured, and their explanations sound perfectly logical on the surface. To anyone watching from the outside, they might appear to be the calm, rational person, simply trying to resolve a misunderstanding. But beneath that calm exterior, the conversation slowly begins to shift in ways you can't quite explain. The focus moves away from the issue you wanted to discuss and onto your reactions, your memory, your emotions, or your supposed flaws. Before long, you're no longer talking about what hurt you. Instead, you're defending why you felt hurt in the first place. They begin asking questions that seem innocent but subtly challenge your perception. Are you sure that's what happened? Maybe you're remembering it differently. Why do you always assume the worst about me? None of these statements openly deny your experience, but together they create a powerful sense of uncertainty. This is what makes the experience so confusing. There isn't always obvious shouting or blatant cruelty. Instead, there is a gradual erosion of confidence. Little by little, your certainty starts to disappear. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you misunderstood. You second-guess your instincts. You even apologize for things that only hours earlier you were convinced weren't your fault. The emotional impact can be profound because the conversation isn't simply about solving a disagreement anymore. It becomes about destabilizing your sense of reality. Instead of leaving with clarity, you leave exhausted, mentally drained, and strangely guilty, even when you can't identify exactly what you supposedly did wrong. Over time, this pattern changes the way you approach conflict. You stop bringing up problems because every conversation leaves you feeling confused rather than understood. You begin editing your words before speaking, anticipating how they'll be challenged or turned against you. Eventually, you may start trusting their interpretation of events more than your own, simply because questioning yourself feels easier than enduring another emotionally disorienting discussion. Perhaps the most unsettling part is that this process rarely happens all at once. It develops gradually, through countless small interactions that slowly chip away at your confidence. Looking back, you realize it wasn't one dramatic conversation that changed you. It was the accumulation of many subtle moments where your reality was questioned often enough that you began questioning it yourself. That's why these experiences can leave such a lasting mark. Not because they were loud or explosive, but because they quietly taught you to distrust your own perceptions. There's a reason for that, and once you understand the mechanics behind it, it stops being so disorienting. Start with what actually happens inside a relationship like this while it's still running. It's easy to think of it as two people exchanging affection, frustration, whatever normal couples exchange. But with someone who leans narcissistic, the exchange usually isn't balanced. Healthy people give each other attention and get some back. In this dynamic, the attention mostly flows one way, toward them. Their sense of who they are was never built from the inside. It leans almost entirely on what's reflected back at them by the people around them, and especially by you. So as long as you were emotionally engaged with them, angry, hurt, hopeful, devoted, any of it, they had what they needed to feel like a real, solid, important person. The moment you genuinely check out, that supply dries up. And here's the part that surprises people. It doesn't matter if you're still physically present. You could be sitting at the same dinner table, still going through the motions of shared life, and internally, you've already left. From the outside, nothing looks different. But something shifts in them almost immediately because what they're sensitive to isn't your presence, it's your engagement. When that engagement disappears, they start to panic in a very specific primal way. Not the ordinary sadness of a partner drifting away, something closer to real alarm, the kind that comes from losing something they depend on to function. This is usually when people notice their ex or partner becoming strangely watchful. Not romantic attentiveness, something colder, like they're studying your face for a reaction, any reaction. Waiting for a flicker of annoyance or sadness that tells them they still have an effect on you. And when they don't find it, when you're just calm, unreadable, going about your evening, the tension in the room can get almost uncomfortable. You haven't picked a fight, you haven't even raised your voice, but suddenly there's this heavy, charged atmosphere, like they can feel your independence as a kind of threat, even if you've said nothing at all. They might ask you something offhand. What are you thinking about? In a tone that sounds casual, but isn't really casual. It's a probe. If you answer honestly with something like nothing much, and they can tell you mean it, that indifference lands harder on them than almost anything else could. Because someone like this can't really see themselves clearly except through how you react to them. Your anger makes them feel powerful. Your sadness makes them feel significant. Your indifference makes them feel like they don't exist at all. That's an uncomfortable thing to sit with. So most people in this position won't sit with it for long. They'll try to provoke something, anything, just to prove to themselves they still matter. This is why the early quiet phase of a breakup like this can feel more unsettling than the arguments ever did. It's not peace. It's more like the stillness before someone makes a move, small tests, a backhanded comment, a broken promise, a boundary pushed just slightly, waiting to see if you'll finally snap. If you do snap, that reassures them weirdly, because your anger proves you're still tethered to them emotionally. If you stay calm and unreactive instead, it forces them to face something they've spent their whole life avoiding, the possibility that they genuinely don't have power over you anymore. And once passive tactics stop working, a lot of people in this position shift from trying to draw you back in gently to trying to force a reaction out of you by other means. What tends to happen next can look almost like a different person showed up. The warmth that used to define the relationship, especially early on, flips into something cold, sometimes openly hostile. And it can happen fast enough to be genuinely disorienting. You didn't do anything to provoke it, you just stopped playing along. But in their mind, refusing to keep supplying attention and validation reads as a kind of betrayal, even though you never framed it that way. Part of what's going on here is that people like this tend to think of others in extremes. You're either someone who makes them feel good about themselves, or you're an obstacle, a threat, someone working against them. There's rarely a comfortable middle ground. So the instant you stop filling the first role, you often get shoved into the second one almost automatically, because the alternative, accepting that they might be the problem, is too threatening to their self-image to consider. It's much easier for them to rewrite you as the villain of the story than to sit with the discomfort of being wrong. You'll often see this bleed into completely ordinary moments. You put on an outfit they used to compliment constantly, expecting nothing in particular, and instead get a cold, dismissive comment clearly meant to needle at your confidence. It's rarely really about the outfit. It's a test, a way of checking whether you still flinch the way you used to. Partly this is just an attempt to get some kind of emotional reaction out of you, since if they can't get affection anymore, negative attention will do. But there's often something else underneath it too, a kind of quiet resentment. Watching you get stronger and more sure of yourself while they feel hollow and unstable inside can trigger genuine envy, even if they'd never admit it. And that envy sometimes shows up as an urge to knock you back down rather than let you keep moving forward without them. You'll probably also notice your shared history getting rewritten, sometimes in real time, right in front of you. Things you both remember clearly get twisted into evidence that you were the difficult one, the selfish one, the one who never tried hard enough. They might flatly deny things you know for a fact they said. It's a more aggressive, less deniable version of the confusion tactics that may have shown up earlier in the relationship, less about creating doubt, more about asserting dominance over the narrative. If you find yourself quietly grieving the good version of this person, wondering where that warmth went, it's worth considering that the warm version might have always been more performance than reality, a persona built to keep you invested, and what you're seeing now is simply what was underneath it the whole time. Once someone like this realizes they can't control how you feel about them anymore, the next place they often turn is how other people see you. It's a strategic shift, whether they describe it that way or not. If they can convince the people around you that you're the unstable one, the dramatic one, the problem, then anything you say later about what actually happened gets automatically discounted before you've even said it. This usually starts quietly, sometimes before you're even fully aware the relationship has ended. Little comments dropped to mutual friends, coworkers, family members, rarely outright lies at first, more often exaggerated concern. I'm really worried about her. She's been acting so erratic lately. It's an efficient move because it casts them as the patient, carrying one in you as the person who needs to be managed or handled carefully. By the time you go looking for support from people in your shared circle, the story may have already been shaped before you got there, so your very real justified reactions can end up read through a lens that was quietly constructed in advance. This kind of isolation isn't a side effect, it's usually the actual point. Someone who's built an image around being likable, reasonable, or wronged has a lot riding on you not being believed because you're the one person who's actually seen behind that image. Undermining your credibility protects them from exposure. And it rarely takes intentional villains to pull off. Most of the people relaying these stories to others genuinely believe they're being supportive, not that they've become part of someone else's campaign. You might notice it physically before you even understand why, walking into a family gathering or a shared workplace and feeling the air shift, conversations pausing, people avoiding eye contact, even though you haven't done anything to warrant it. That's usually a sign the narrative has already made its way around before you arrived. And the harder part is what it can start to do to your own sense of reality. When enough people around you seem to be quietly agreeing with a version of events that doesn't match what you remember, it's natural to start second-guessing yourself. Am I misremembering? Am I overreacting? That self-doubt is often more effective at controlling you than anything the person says to your face, because at that point, they don't even need to be in the room for it to work. It helps to remember, in the middle of all that this usually isn't as personal as it feels in the moment, even though it feels intensely personal. It's more tactical, a way of protecting a fragile self-image by making sure nobody looks too closely at what's actually underneath it. Then, often just when you've steeled yourself for more of this kind of conflict, the tone can flip entirely. The anger stops. Instead of hostility, you get something that looks like collapse, tears, apparent regret, maybe even outright vulnerability that seems completely genuine. For a lot of people, this phase is actually harder to get through than the anger was. When someone shows you aggression, your instincts tell you to protect yourself. When someone shows you what looks like real pain and remorse, your instincts often tell you to help, and that impulse can be a lot harder to override. It's worth being honest about why this particular move tends to work so well on caring, empathetic people specifically. If you're the kind of person who tends to want to help and heal others, someone who spent real time with you has likely picked up on that, whether consciously or not, and they know exactly how to appeal to it. You could probably withstand their cruelty because cruelty gives you a clear reason to stay away. What's much harder to withstand is what looks like a broken, remorseful version of them because it doesn't trigger your defenses, it triggers your compassion. This isn't usually a mature, considered acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It tends to look more like regression, someone suddenly presenting as fragile, lost, and in need of rescuing, often at the exact moment you've finally started pulling away for good. Maybe you've packed a bag or gone a week without speaking to them, and suddenly there they are. Not aggressive, but looking like the person you first fell for, or at least a wounded version of them. The tears in that moment are often real, in the sense that the emotion is real, but it's rarely grief over what they put you through. It's usually closer to panic over losing control and fear of what's left of them once you're no longer there to prop them up. They might say things they've never admitted before. I know I've been terrible. I'm going to get help. I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. Please don't give up now. It's a powerful thing to hear, especially if some part of you spent years hoping exactly this moment would come. Proof that they really were capable of change, that the good parts you saw in them weren't imaginary. Watching someone you cared about seem to be in real pain can pull at you in ways that are hard to resist logically, even when part of you knows better. It's worth remembering here that real change in people, genuine and lasting, tends to be slow and unglamorous. It usually involves years of difficult, unrewarded internal work, not a sudden overnight transformation triggered by the fear of losing someone. What looks like a breakthrough in this moment is much more often a strategic pause than an actual turning point, not necessarily calculated in some cold, conscious way, but functioning that way regardless of intent. It tends to draw you back in exactly long enough for old patterns to find their footing again. If you do let them back in during this phase, the pattern rarely resets to zero. It tends to pick right back up, often faster and harder than before. The vulnerability that pulled you back tends to fade quickly once the immediate threat of losing you is gone. Promises about therapy or change quietly stop getting mentioned, and the same behaviors that pushed you away in the first place tend to return, sometimes worse, because now there's fresh evidence about exactly what it takes to bring you back. Sometimes this plays out even more directly. A late-night visit, someone showing up looking genuinely worn down, talking for the first time about childhood pain or old fears they'd always kept guarded before. I have nowhere else to go. You're the only one who gets me. It's an enormous, heavy thing to hand someone, and it can feel meaningful to be trusted with it. But there's a real difference between someone wanting your help to heal, which requires real ongoing effort on their part, and someone wanting you to simply carry the weight of them, which mostly just requires you to keep sacrificing your own energy and boundaries indefinitely. The hardest and maybe most important question in this whole phase is whether you can witness someone's pain without automatically taking responsibility for fixing it. Their pain is real, but it's also the result of choices and patterns that belong to them, not to you. Stepping back from that doesn't make you cold. It's arguably one of the more caring things you can do, both for yourself and longer term for them, because rescuing someone from the consequences of their own behavior tends to remove the only real incentive they'd ever have to actually change. There's a deeper layer to all of this worth naming plainly, because it explains a lot of the confusion people feel during conflicts like this. A lot of people carrying deep, unresolved shame or insecurity find it almost unbearable to sit with that feeling directly. Instead of processing it internally, it gets pushed outward, often onto the person closest to them. In practice, this can look like being blamed for reactions that were provoked deliberately, or being made to feel responsible for someone else's anger after being pushed toward it for hours. You might find yourself in the heat of an argument reacting in ways that are completely out of character for you, raising your voice, saying something sharp you'd never normally say, and afterward feeling a wave of shame, wondering if maybe you really are the difficult one in the relationship. If that's happened to you, it's worth being gentle with yourself about it. A person can be pushed slowly and repeatedly toward a breaking point they'd never reach under normal circumstances. And the reaction that follows isn't really a reflection of who they are, it's closer to a natural physiological response to sustained pressure. The trouble is that in the moment it happens, it can look, even to you, like proof that you're the unreasonable one. Recognizing that pattern for what it is tends to be one of the most freeing realizations in the entire process, because it lets you stop carrying blame that was never actually yours to hold. Eventually, if none of these approaches manage to pull you back in, and you keep responding with steadiness instead of chaos, things tend to escalate rather than fade quietly. This stage can be loud and frightening, sometimes involving threats, sometimes reckless behavior, sometimes attempts to damage your reputation, your finances, or your peace of mind through more forceful means. It can feel in the moment like the other person has become far more powerful and dangerous than before. In reality, this kind of noise is usually a sign of the opposite. Someone who has run out of quieter, more effective ways to hold on to influence over you and is reaching for whatever's left. A person who genuinely still had power over the situation typically wouldn't need to make that much noise about it. Often this phase includes a sudden new relationship, sometimes surprisingly soon after everything ended, paraded fairly visibly. It's designed to sting, and often it does. But it's worth understanding what's usually behind it. It's rarely a sign of having moved on peacefully. It's much more often a fast attempt to fill the space you left, a way of numbing the sting of rejection and reassuring themselves they're still desirable, still important, still capable of being loved. If it seems aimed at getting a reaction out of you specifically, that's often because it is. Legal or financial conflict, if it happens, deserves to be taken seriously and handled with real documentation and proper support. That part isn't just psychological noise. It can have real consequences and deserves real precautions. But even there, it's worth recognizing the underlying pattern. Prolonging conflict, even hostile conflict, keeps you thinking about them, talking about them, engaged with them in some way. For someone who depends heavily on other people's attention to feel real, staying your adversary can feel more bearable than becoming a stranger you rarely think about at all. Eventually, though, this kind of intensity tends to burn out on its own, especially if it isn't being fed. Sustained rage and manic energy require fuel, and if you stop supplying reactions, explanations, and emotional engagement, that fuel runs out. It doesn't happen instantly, and it isn't always a clean, satisfying ending. Sometimes it fades into a kind of flat withdrawal. Sometimes attention shifts almost entirely onto a new relationship, with the old history quietly rewritten or dropped altogether. Either way, it tends to end not because the person found peace, but because the old strategies simply stopped working. What comes after all of this, if you get through it, is worth naming clearly, because it can be hard to recognize while you're still in the middle of it. It isn't bitterness and it isn't numbness. Both of those keep you tied to the past in their own way. It's something closer to genuine detachment, a place where you can see someone's behavior clearly without absorbing it into your own sense of self. You stop asking why they do something like this, because that question assumes they're operating with the same emotional wiring you are, and often they simply aren't, at least not in the way you'd hope. From that distance, their insults start to look less like personal attacks and more like predictable patterns repeating themselves. Their anger stops feeling like a referendum on your worth. Their silence stops feeling like a puzzle you need to solve. You lose the urge to explain yourself to someone who was never really listening in the way you needed them to. And oddly, that loss is one of the more freeing parts of the whole process. You stop needing them to understand you because you finally understand the situation well enough not to need their validation of it. This kind of steadiness tends to be the one thing that never seems to work on someone who thrives on reaction. They can respond to your anger because anger is still engagement. They can respond to lingering affection because that gives them leverage. What's much harder for someone like this to work with is genuine indifference, offered calmly and without cruelty. When there's nothing left to provoke, there's nothing left for old tactics to grab onto. Getting to that place usually asks something real of you too. Not becoming cold or uncaring as a person, but getting comfortable with parts of yourself you might have been taught to see as unkind. Being willing to prioritize your own peace over someone else's comfort. Being willing to hold a boundary even while someone is crying on the other side of it. Being willing to walk away without a clean, satisfying resolution. None of that makes you like the person who hurt you. It just means you've stopped being available as fuel for a pattern that was never really about you to begin with. If you've been through something like this, or you're in the middle of it right now, it's worth trusting your own memory of what actually happened, even when the people around you, or the person themselves, are telling a different version. What you lived through was real, and the version of you that comes out the other side of it, calmer, more discerning, less willing to abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable, tends to be a lot more solid than the version that went in.